Greetings, everybody. Today is February 5th, 2026. This is the first week of February. Slash, I'm covering some things from the last week of January, the final week of January. So I promised a review of the effects of the general strike after it took place. This was back on the 20th when we were about to have it, either the 20th or I think it was the night of the 19th through the 20th that I made that video, recorded it. I might have uploaded a little bit later, but sorry. It is so it took me a while to collect my thoughts on that, and a bunch of other stuff happened in the meantime as well. And so I just figured that I would cover all of that stuff. So one of the things that happened late last month, first of all, before I get to the general strike, one of the things that happened with that protest, which I actually disagreed with, the tactics and the visual that it created, and just the decency of going into an active worship service. It's different when it's the parking lot at the beginning or the end. I wouldn't have had a problem with that. But the service itself is something that you should actually not disturb. And so a bunch of protesters went in there, and they're being brought up on federal charges, which is quite an overreach. I think that in most cases, something like that is handled by the state government. And they're trying to use the FACE Act, which was one of those 3/5 compromise kind of things that the Republicans carved out on the abortion issue, which I have a lot of contempt for it. But they really did try to create a compromise where we're going to protect abortion clinics from vigilantes, is the best way that I can put it. We're going to protect them from vigilantes, but we're also going to do it for churches. So a little bit of something for everybody. Obviously, didn't really, but I'm happy that there was the protections available. It didn't really solve anything in the long term. I'm happy that there were protections available, however, for the churches, but I don't think that any of this was really a federal issue in the first place. In any case, they used that act, the FACE Act, which was, again, one of those compromise omnibus bills that got passed in the 1990s during the earlier stages of the culture war. They used that act to... I can't wait till the culture war is over, by the way. That's something we're going to have to do together, all of you in my audience. But they used this act as grounds to arrest probably a few of the protesters, but most importantly, they arrested, I'd have to look actually further into that. I'm sorry, you get to see a little bit of the behind the scenes work. So yes, I do believe that the activists were actually brought up, the people who were in that building, which again I disagree with. I think they should have done it in the parking lot. People have the right to practice their religion in peace. And honestly, it's infuriating to me that we were the ones that did this and got into the news over it first. Like, ICE should have been the ones to bust down the doors to a church and get caught on camera doing it and be all over the news. And so this was definitely a loss to us. I think that it takes a certain level of delusion to believe that this was a good look, and I disagree with it on principle. But they also but what they did the most prominent people that they arrested were not the activists themselves that went into this building, in with tactics that I disagree with. It was journalists that were reporting on what was happening. And so I want to do a little counterfactual with y'all before we move on to other stuff. Can you imagine if on January 6th, if the Capitol Police, while they were trying to protect the Capitol from the riot that was about to take place, arrested the journalists who were reporting on January 6th? We never would have heard the end of it for the whole Biden administration. We never would have heard the end of arresting journalists as if they were the criminals. You have the right, the First Amendment right as a journalist, to report on a crime. Like just a couple days ago, there was a shooting in there was a shooting somewhere else in the Boston metro area. That I heard about, and that shooting was there was reporting on it within an hour or two. Sorry, I'm very tired. There was reporting on it from within an hour or two of the incident, which happened about 6 p.m. or so on whichever day it was. I forgot. And this is the central feature of how we understand crime, is that there are reporters that report on crimes, on murders, on shootings, on all of this stuff. It was a personal issue. It did not, this particular one, it did not have a political motive. But there are, and how do we know what we know about this shooting that happened in the Boston metropolitan area? We know because there were reporters that reported on it. And those reporters are not going to jail for what happened. Those reporters are not going to jail. And that's how it works. You can't just arrest the person who's reporting on the crime just because they're reporting on a crime. Oh, they're part of it. No, they're not. You have a First Amendment right to report on a crime. And again, I think that it was, if anything, it was a state crime. Like the FACE Act is a ridiculous act of overreach to use this, to apply charges from the FACE Act onto people who were not actually acting in violence, and the people were allowed in the church. They just weren't allowed to worship there in the way that they normally were, because noise is like the radio spectrum. Once you start, when people monopolize the air with their noises and their chants and their protest songs or whatever, then the people who actually go to that church, let's say, you can't just mute them. They're there. And so it was probably a disturbing the peace charge or something like that. Some state crime, if anything, is what they committed. But there's no reason to... And frankly, I am mad that church has refused to hold its pastor accountable. And frankly, there should probably be multiple pastors in any church. I think that that's a good structure. I don't think that it's reliable to have a single pastor that is a single point of failure for the entire spiritual life of a church. And so I'm mad about what that church did, but the answer is not to go in and disrupt their service. But the FACE Act is quite an overreach in general. But let's say that there was a crime committed there, and that particular crime is the one that we're focusing on, the violating the FACE Act, which, again, I disagree with the federal government here. Those people that they arrested, Don Lemon and a local journalist who is actually more of a hero, and Don Lemon may go around the country. He's an investigative reporter. That's why he was there. He's not just a talking head. But these local reporters, these armies of local reporters, are the people who allow us to see at all what is going on, in conjunction with regular people with cell phones that allow us to see at all what's going on with ICE. And they charge them as if they were people who were going in, as if they chose any of this. They didn't choose for there to be a demonstration inside of that church that was disturbing their ability to worship in peace in the sanctuary. Like, say what you want about that. I think that I disagree with it, and I think that it could violate some state laws, but they didn't choose that. They were just reporting on the news, as is their job. They were just reporting on a crime or a crime. You can interpret it however you want. They were reporting on it. You have the right to report on a crime. So, can you imagine if they did that with January 6th? If they charged those people with occupying a federal building or insurrection, or whatever the people at January 6th were charged for, who ended up getting pardoned shamefully for their crimes. Can you imagine if journalists and photographers that were there had been charged? The person who took the iconic photo of January 6th with the Trump flag replacing the American flag on the Capitol. Can you imagine if those people got arrested? We never would have heard the end of it. When it comes to the general strike, or the prototype of a general strike that took place in Minnesota, now that you've all skipped to it. And first I have to say, based on the record with these overpowered prosecutions, because the court system has been left relatively intact over the past year, other than a few appointments of judges and things like that, nothing physical and kinetic has happened really in the court system. They've tried a few things, but not at scale. Because of that, this is likely to be just thrown out, either by a judge or by the jury. This is very likely to simply be thrown out. So I wouldn't be too concerned about it unless what we expect doesn't happen, which is for those charges to be thrown out. But the next thing that I have to say is the main thing that I've seen over this past week. It was a mixed success. I think one of the biggest failures of the demonstration on the 20th, the strike demonstration in Minnesota, one of the biggest weaknesses of it was that they didn't build the infrastructure. They didn't do a prototype of, for instance, paying wages or anything like that. There wasn't paying a day of wages for the unionized workers in, I believe it was only the union workers, maybe some other people, but the union workers were the ones that were allowed to leave work on that day by their unions. To pay the workers wages for one day, to replace the workers' wages for one day, it doesn't really have that much of an effect. It wouldn't, like, we were able to do without it for one day, but what it does is it primes all of those systems. You have to have those, if you're a union or if you are any other civil society organization that's participating, you have to have that infrastructure set up. And it forces you to confront the inadequacies and test out the inadequacies of that infrastructure. And none of that happened, much to my chagrin, with this strike. The workers just took it in the A, proverbially. Sorry if I gave anyone any. Anyway, moving swiftly on. The workers. The workers just took it, and that was possible for a one-day strike, but I don't think a one-day strike is going to cut it. For instance, if midterm elections are severely interfered with, or if the results are thrown out, I don't think that will cut it, which has happened before. It's happened with primaries, where results in certain states have been thrown out. It's illegal profoundly, but it has happened. Trump tried to do it in 2020. It could definitely happen. There's a lot of disinformation that's already being laid in order to justify about voter fraud, including from Steve Bannon, and just like they always have done. So I would say that a one-day strike is not going to cut it in those environments. We have to have that infrastructure set up. And I'm mad that they didn't do a dry run. I'm mad that they didn't use the opportunity that the strike provided to test out and really prototype this. And I come at this thinking mechanically about it. This is a prototype. We want it to be as close to the real thing as possible. We want it to be a dummy version of the real thing. And in that respect, they failed. But in the immediate respect, they succeeded. And the Alex Preddy shooting happened right after that. I can't believe I didn't cover that. It's very similar in a lot of ways to the Renee Nicole Good murder that took place at the beginning of the year. And I did cover that one. I'm surprised that I didn't ever cover Alex Preddy. Obviously, there were less things that could be twisted out of context about that, and I hope that it's getting through to some of the conservatives that have been seduced into this self-deletion kind of movement. I hope that it's actually breaking through to them. I'm sure it is to some of them. And obviously, for some, the only way that they're going to leave is for us to create a positive alternative to the Trump movement. But anyway, I think a lot of that escalation was because the ICE agents on the ground, as well as people in the leadership, potentially, who set the culture, understood the hazard to their ability to continue their operation, their terrorist operation, in Minneapolis. The people in that organization, in ICE, from top to bottom, understood the hazard to their goals of any kind of labor stoppage. And I think that they panicked in a lot of ways, and that was why there was a desperation to create another murder, to create more terror among the rank and file ICE agents. I'm not sure, but it could always be there. But something else happened a little bit afterwards, which is pressure campaigns from the Minnesota-based corporations. It didn't come from other parts of the country, just the places that had their headquarters in Minnesota, which is why I don't think it was some magic goodwill on part of the billionaire CEOs of these companies, but I think that it was a response to, we actually got a response. Again, I don't think that a one-day strike is enough to provoke a response from the federal government, but it was for these corporations, and it did promote a token change in the federal government. They removed one of their people and replaced with another. I did not bother reporting on that in a post or obviously with a video at the time. It was very insignificant, and the operation is still ongoing. Metro Surge. What a dopey name. But it did provoke a large response from the Minnesota business community, and even a small response from the federal government, which is captured, obviously, and that's the ball game. That's the hardest thing to change, is the federal government. But it did provoke a response from both of them, and so even though I'm very, it was, even as a prototype, it was a prototype in a lot of ways. It was a failure for a real general strike because we didn't do any testing of the infrastructure, and some of that may have been because of Taft-Hartley or whatever, but somebody else, at the very least. There should have been someone who was willing to pay the salaries of those workers for a day, or at the very least write a press release about it and make a task force about it or whatever. Hey, I'm always willing. If anybody is willing to get in touch, I'm always willing to lead such a movement or to make ads for that or whatever. Obviously, I'll be more well put together when I make those ads than I am now, but if anyone wants me to do that, I think that it wasn't a complete failure because there was still a response, and so it showed, for people in this country who don't necessarily have experience with labor stoppages, it showed that is something that has a lot of bang for its buck, because we've done congressional campaigns lasting months in order to get changes related to Epstein and stuff like that, and we've done letter writing and all kinds of stuff, and a lot of it has failed or it's taken a very long time to succeed. And shutting down labor in just one state, bam, we get a response within a week. And obviously I wouldn't expect a life-changing response within a week, but the bang for our buck is much better on this stuff. And it showed people who don't have a lot of experience that that's the case. And so I don't think it's a complete failure. And I definitely hope that whoever gets targeted by ICE next maybe it's going to be Minnesota again, or maybe it'll be somewhere else. Although Minnesota was quite a mistake. To go to Minnesota and do this was an enormous mistake on their part, because by numerous metrics, it's one of the healthiest states in the country when it comes to mental health. And so going there was a real mistake, I think, on part of ICE. They did it because Minnesota Republicans wanted to talk about fraud, and it gave them an excuse to do this dopey Operation Metro Surge. I really think that it was a huge mistake. There's a ton of other places that they could have gone and gotten more submission, more cowering, people who are more afraid, and who already have more of a sense of helplessness and trauma. And Minnesota was one of the dumbest places that they could have gone. But they did create an example. They showed that ICE is not invulnerable, the people in Minnesota. And I hope that these people, I hope that whoever gets targeted by ICE next is able to do a similar general strike, is able to do some kind of, and grow on it a little bit, improve on it, make it something that's more organized, have a plan to provide for people's needs, set stuff up like that, actually have that organizational infrastructure in place, because that is how we're going to get out of this. So, putting all of that together, do I still stand by my prediction that this regime will be out of power in some fundamental way, like the cabinet, not just Trump himself, but the cabinet will be replaced by either some kind of compromise Republican or and some people have said, I have heard people say that it could be a Democratic speaker after the midterms or whatever that could replace this. I think that would be a little bit bold, but there's a bunch of things that we could reach for as demands in our general strike. And it is all up to Congress, which means that it's up to us, because we're going to be the ones, when we have that infrastructure in place, we're going to be the ones that call the shots over Congress. And if we can have that demand, the sky's the limit in terms of what we could ask for. And we should probably start envisioning what it is that we want. What do we want to demand? What are our demands going to be? What are demands that are likely to be met, and also that accomplish what we need to accomplish in order to survive? And so it could be whoever. There's several scenarios of ways that it could play out, but do I stand by my prediction that I made about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago, that we're more than halfway through this? Yes, I do. And first of all, we're more than halfway to the midterms. And the midterms are a focal point. They will force the issue. These people are going to have to break the midterms if they want to stay in power, either through gerrymandering or through things that are illegal. And they tried the gerrymandering, and the Supreme Court doesn't want to make it easy for them, as I discussed in a previous video. They have to break the midterms, basically, in some way or another, in order to push forward with their plans. And so that means that it's a focal point. And I believe that sometime around the midterms that we will discover, because we're already starting to, the kinds of actions that are going to be required to get these people out of power. So, yes, I do stand by that prediction that we are more than halfway through the self proclaimed Trump administration. I absolutely stand by that prediction. So, I think in that respect it was a success, not as much of a roaring success as I would have hoped, but it was pretty successful, and I hope that we do it again. So, pretty quiet week as far as they go in terms of the self-proclaimed Trump administration, and so I hope that you are all I hope you're all safe and sound as much as you can be in this time. Uh, it's always good to be able to review these things and have a reality check and be safe and successful, whatever that means. Take care, everybody. Bye.